glory years for the mob were right after the Second World War, right up to 1960. That was it.
Nick Pileggi has written about the mob for 30 years and was co-author of the movie Goodfellas.
They owned politicians. They owned unions. They could actually socialize. The FBI said they didn't exist. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was glorious.
Now, would you explain what evading a place means?
Well, if you're
Jack and Robert Kennedy had studied the mob since 1957, when they took the lead on the McClellan Committee's investigation of organized crime and its association with organized labor. They focused on Jimmy Hoffa, president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the largest union in the country. They were quick to clash.
I would like to say, Senator, that if you're trying to penalize the American labor movement for Hoffa, or for your dislike for Hoffa, then spell it out in the law, exempting everybody except Hoffa. Will you please?
Well, we're exempting everyone but racketeers and hoodlums and crooks.
I would like to have you draft that language, sir.
I'm not talking necessarily...
As Attorney General, Robert Kennedy was determined to convert his knowledge of the mob into a new national policy. Don't define it. Do something about it, he told the young lawyers he recruited for this mission. Robert Blakey was one of those lawyers.
You just can't know how inefficient and complicated and inept the government is unless it's held together in some way by the force of somebody's personality. Robert Kennedy had that and did that.
He forced FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to shift manpower and resources away from hunting communists to busting gangsters. He surfaced mob informant Joe Valachi in a nationally televised hearing.
Man, he picks your finger. Who? The Godfather.
He picks your finger.
He picks your finger with a needle. Makes a little blood come out. In other words, Wesley expressed the blood relation, supposed to be like brothers.
That's the letting of blood.
That's right.
All of us in that position.
Under Robert Kennedy, successful prosecutions of organized crime figures increased 700%.
By 1963, J. Edgar Hoover was becoming isolated and entrenched within the FBI he had created. Then, just after lunchtime on November 22nd, Hoover called his boss, Bobby Kennedy, to tell him that his brother, the president, had been shot in Dallas.
Got a call from Bobby saying that the president was dead, that he'd gotten a call from Hoover, and Bobby said, I think Hoover enjoyed telling me.
The next day, while most of the United States was reeling with the size of the tragedy, Hoover went to the races. And what work he did in terms of the FBI's follow-up on the assassination, he did on the telephone from his box at the races.
This is Tony Lewis, taping with Bob Kennedy, and why don't we talk now about the relationship with Mr. Hoover and the FBI?
The relationship between Bobby and Hoover could be summarized in a word: blackmail.
Do you now think that Mr. Hoover is a dangerous person, or just nasty?
No, I think he's dangerous.
Did you ever have this feeling that he knew a very great deal about you, personally?
I suppose every month he'd send somebody around to give information on a member of my family or myself so that it would be clear that he was on top of all of these things and received all of this information. I really deferred to him. I made a real effort because I knew that he didn't like me. He is rather a psycho, and I used to keep his ego up. We used to arrange for him every 2 or 3 months, go over and have lunch alone with the president. I made a fuss over him.
When I say blackmail, I had in mind also Hoover's knowledge of President Kennedy's trysts, shall we say. And he, I think, made it very plain to Robert Kennedy that he knew all about it. And Kennedy knew that Hoover would not hesitate to use it against his brother.
I remember one occasion he said that my brother and I had a group of girls on the 12th floor of the LaSalle Hotel, and that the president used to go over there once a week and have the place surrounded by Secret Service people and then go up and have assassinations. And a lot of it was so far-fetched. I mean, it was ridiculous on the face of it.
Now, more with G. Gordon Liddy. Mr. Hoover would send someone such as I up to Capitol Hill to knock on the senator's door to apologize for the intrusion on his privacy from Mr. Hoover and to assure him that Mr. Hoover had seen to it that that bit of information had been removed from the files, and say that Mr. Hoover counsels you, sir, with all due respect, that if we could stumble upon this, so too might your political enemies. Then the fellow would sort of wipe his brow, thank Mr. Hoover, and I would return.
We do know from other congressmen and senators that have been through this that he'd always say, don't worry, I know about it, but you're okay. I think it was subtle blackmail, and they did too. One of the reasons I think Hoover stayed on years after the civil service rules said he should retire is that I think a lot of presidents were afraid to drop the hammer on him.
Presidents went to him before they were elected to pledge that they would keep him in office. Democrats went to him, Republicans went to him. They had conferences. And he sat there like a king. And the next president was saying, yes, if I'm elected, I'll keep you in office, period.
In the 1950s, a man who would be president was apparently having an affair with a young woman in this Washington townhouse. Inevitably, a photograph of the man leaving in the early morning found its way into Hoover's growing file on Senator John F. Kennedy. The day after he was elected president, John Kennedy reappointed J. Edgar Hoover as director of the FBI. Hoover's immediate boss would be Robert Kennedy, an attorney general determined to crack down on organized crime.
When Robert Kennedy became the Attorney General of the United States, we had an intensified investigation of organized crime.
The FBI agents who were interested in organized crime have been working very hard, thought they had died and went to heaven when Robert Kennedy became the Attorney General.
Hoover wanted no part in Robert Kennedy's war on organized crime. The FBI director fought back with the weapon he knew best.
Hoover was such a power at that time that he would actually send memos to the Attorney General and saying, I thought you'd be interested in knowing that your brother, the president, had such and such a girlfriend, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
One such girlfriend was Judith Exner, then Judith Campbell.
The relationship that I had with Jack from early 1960, Hoover knew all about that, and he used that as leverage.
FBI wiretaps had revealed that when Judith Campbell wanted to contact John Kennedy, she placed her calls to his devoted secretary, Evelyn Lincoln.
Well, in this one instance, he sent a memorandum on March the 20th, 1962, saying that there was a young lady that had made 90 calls to the White House, to Evelyn Lincoln. And did you know that she is connected with the mafia? And he would have an appointment.
Ironically, the wiretaps that Robert Kennedy had forced Hoover to place on mafiosi like Sam Giancana's henchman, Johnny Roselli, revealed that both men knew Judith Campbell.
So they arranged a luncheon day, March 22nd, 1962, at which time they discussed the telephone calls.
And during that meeting, he let him know face to face that he knew about Jack's relationship with me. Right after the meeting, Jack called me. He was furious because in his eyes he felt that he just couldn't believe that Hoover would have the audacity to do this face to face and, in a sense, try to threaten him.
Hoover's files may have helped him keep his job, but nothing could stop Bobby Kennedy's war on the mafia, and by now, even Hoover had been forced to do something about it.
Lyndon Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover, over many years, had an unusually close personal and professional relationship. And it all had to do with Hoover's power and Johnson's power.
It was no surprise that President Johnson reappointed Hoover. What has not been known is the part Hoover may have played in Johnson becoming president at all.